Before our live message, I'd like to tell you about a special live stream who recently passed on, and that is James McCaffrey. And I'm reading from a message released by Sandra Woodard Irby and the Staff Friends portion of Facebook, which many of you may not have seen. Born on May 27, 1938, James McCaffrey was a former member of the board of the Summit Lighthouse. He was also a devotee of the Masters and confidant of the messengers Mark and Elizabeth Prophet since 1971. We learned that he passed away on Tuesday, July 26, 2011. He was living in Chandler, Arizona, and continued following the teachings and gave his decrees faithfully every day. This is Alex Reichart now speaking. I had the privilege of working for Jim on many projects on staff for decades. To me, he was the rock of Gibraltar, someone who could keep his head during the greatest challenges, and there were many. If I was stumped on a project, sometimes Mother would tell me to talk to Jim. And here are some of his stories from Jim's point of view. I came into the teachings of the Summit Lighthouse in 1967 through a co-worker at Lockheed. He told me about an upcoming class that was going to be held in Colorado Springs in July, and I decided to attend. But I only had an old program for the previous Easter class, which said one of the dictations was going to be from Jesus. When I saw that, I thought that he was going to come in person. Then I learned he was going to speak through the messenger. So I went to my first conference in Colorado Springs. Mark and Elizabeth Prophet were both giving dictations, and there were about 100 people in attendance. Ruth Farnham played the organ, and Alda Hudson played the piano. Attending an Ascended Master conference was quite impressive, and it changes lives forever. I don't think anybody can be acquainted with the teachings and not have it change their life forever. If not, they didn't understand what they saw. Afterwards, I returned home to Los Angeles. Ruth Hawkins was the group leader, and she led faithfully every Sunday. Meetings were held in a Masonic temple. Sound familiar? One time, Mark Prophet came to Los Angeles by himself. Since he did not have a tape player, I set mine up to record the dictation. It had a 7-inch reel. Those were the good old days. What inspired me to join staff? God. I went with the messengers and other keepers on a pilgrimage to Darjeeling, India in 1970. While we were at the hotel, Mother asked me if I had ever considered coming on staff. Yes, but the time has not arrived yet. Moria responded through Mother, in your patience possess ye your soul. So I joined staff on February 11, 1971. Florence Miller was there, but her name at the time was Florence Scott. And remember, Florence was married to Tom Miller, our beloved Norman Thomas Miller. Though my expertise was in engineering, I was assigned to the accounting department and wrote checks, paid bills, and deposited the money. Prior to being on staff, my only knowledge of accounting was a course I took in college. As time went on, I was promoted to being a board member. I never felt as though I was intended to be a board member, but remained so for many years. Florence worked as Mark's executive secretary in the library, which was next to the chapel, and I worked there as well. Florence was always very supportive of staff and helped them quite a bit. One time, Mark had a very moving meeting with her where he conveyed his deep love for her. After Mark passed, Mother appointed a cabinet composed of 5 people, including Florence. Years later, I remember being with Florence at Camelot right before she passed on. She came to me with a problem she was having and said, I don't know if I'll make it or not. I remember a little of my answer. The very last thing that you have to do must be the most difficult thing you have to do. If it were easy, you would have done it already. I hope this is the worst thing I have to do, she responded. Her health had gone downhill for a few weeks, and she had a very difficult time prior to her passing in 1979. Jim says, I used to go to the Four Winds Organic Center in downtown Colorado Springs. It was owned by the church and was used as an outpost to contact seekers. Being a vegetarian, I sat down at the counter and ordered a bowl of homemade chili because I knew they served vegetarian chili and it tasted pretty good. Later, when I paid my sister a visit, she asked me what I wanted to have to eat. Did I want spaghetti with meat or chili? Thinking back on the nice vegetarian chili I had at the Four Winds, I told her I would have the chili. I didn't know she put meat in it until after I was served, and since I'd asked for it, I felt I had to eat it. When I got back to La Tourelle, Mark looked at me and said, "Oh, you had some meat, huh?" I explained to him that I forgot that chili was made with beef. He said, "Yeah, that's right. If you order it, you'll have to eat it." At that time, Omega had dictated and made La Tourelle the retreat of the resurrection spiral, and as a result, staff were to be vegetarians. Regarding either one of the messengers, it's interesting that here is a person who is a human being. They are at some level of development of Christ consciousness. You see their human flaws and their divine attributes. Some people can't reconcile that, and the fallen ones amplify their faults. Jesus didn't demonstrate his Christ consciousness with the idea that he was God and we are nothing. We're supposed to develop the Christ consciousness ourselves. I was thinking about the whole mission of Jesus, that we should be developing our Christ consciousness, and we were lost until the messengers came along. Yes, the Holy Christ self can move us from the human to the divine consciousness instantly. Moria once said that Mark had the ability to go from the lowest level to the highest consciousness faster than anybody has ever been able to do it. During a knighting ceremony at La Tourelle, this is Jim, was knighted by Saint Germain as Sir Llewellyn. That's Lewellyn, Sir Llewellyn, through Mark. Marguerite Baker could pronounce this name like it was her native language. When she said it, it sounded so beautiful, but nobody else could make it sound like she could. At the pageant and banquet in Pasadena, I was the bishop who married Mother and King Arthur in Pasadena. Tom Miller was King Arthur. In 1976, Mother announced we were going to have a ball at the New Year's class in Pasadena. Moria decided it was time to help balance the karma for the destruction of the original Camelot in 5th century England and to redeem our honor. So that is what was shared on that Facebook page about Jim McCaffrey. Moria would like to share with us today that indeed our beloved James McCaffrey made his ascension on August 1st, 2011, having balanced 67% of his karma. And he is working in the retreat of John the Beloved, which is interesting. Jim had a very childlike spirit. I worked with him. In fact, he was the one who called me in Minneapolis in 1976 to come on staff. And at the time, there was an individual who had left kind of in the middle of the night, the accounting department. And so James called me up because I was working at the teaching center in Minneapolis, and I had been doing all the bookkeeping, and he liked the work that I did. And so I had to give 2 weeks' notice at my job. And by the time I got to La Tourelle in Colorado Springs, they had filled that position of the individual that had left, and then I worked in the mail department, what they called mail processing, or I think at the time it was maybe had a different name. So even though I didn't work directly under James at that time in the accounting department, later, many years later, he went to Mother and asked that I be transferred from one department to his department, and so I worked in the accounting department for, I think, about 2 to 2.5 years. And then later, Eileen Connor asked me to come back to the mail processing department, went to Mother. So there was a kind of a, not a rivalry, but there was a working at the higher levels, the echelons of the organization, to secure my help in various departments. I loved working for Jim. He was one of the most harmonious people I can remember. I never saw him get angry. If anything started to kind of rile him, I could see him shift in his body a little bit, but it was like he was integrating the energies of whatever was occurring within himself and like transmuting it and handling it so that everyone could feel comforted. And he would always teach in a very loving way and share in a way that was not demeaning to you, but was uplifting and supportive. And I honored that in Jim. And I think I've told the story once before, but one time before the 1976 summer conference in Washington, D.C., Uncle Kenneth McNeil and Jim and I were riding in a vehicle in Washington, D.C., and we went to the Smithsonian, the Air and Space Museum. And James looked up at the various aircraft that were there, including the Spirit of St. Louis, piloted by, what's his name again? Charles Lindbergh. And he looked at the other vehicles, and he said he had a remembrance of actually piloting airships on Atlantis. He actually had that memory. And it's interesting that he worked in the aerospace industry in this life as an engineer before finding the teachings. So that made sense. So you may be asking, well, what is his name, his Ascended Master name? Is it Sir Llewellyn? Or what? And so El Morya does share with us that we can indeed call to him as Sir Llewellyn, and I'd like to find out if there's a better French pronunciation of that name than what I'm saying. If Donald Galvin or Claire, if you are listening, or even Barbara Gabbert, if you could call in and pronounce that name, we'd love to hear your pronunciation. So 8218, I think, is the extension, right, Boyd? Yeah, it's on now. Okay. So if any of the rest of you who worked on the staff or knew Jim McCaffrey would like to share your stories, I'd like to set up a place on our forum for that. And I know Joyce Hennis and Donald Galvin and a few others of you may have had interactions with James McCaffrey, a wonderful soul. So he lived in Chandler, Arizona before he passed, and that is very near to John the Beloved's retreat. As to why he's working in that retreat, it's because he sees the requirement for the protection of the incoming children, and through his childlike nature and his beautiful heart and soul, he gently ushers them and works with them on a regular basis to assist in their spiritual development. Now, it's interesting that Uncle Kenneth McNeil, who was a friend of Jim's too, works with children from the ascended state. So we call him Sir Laugh-A-Lot, and I can hear in my higher hearing Uncle Kenneth and James McCaffrey, Sir Llewellyn, laughing a lot because Jim had a great sense of humor, and Uncle Kenneth, of course, did. And they're just great souls. And I've been honored to know both of them and work with both of them and love both of them. So